At the quarterly town hall, my sister kissed my fiancé behind a curtain she thought hid them from the stage lights. When I confronted her, she laughed. Jealousy is such a bad look on you, especially at work. She didn't know I had been building a quiet case for months. Expense ledgers, HR emails, a non-disclosure violation with her name on it. I promised I'd say nothing until her wedding day. Then I'd only need 10 minutes. My name is Rowan Vale, at 32. I am the Director of Project Operations for Calix Dynamics, a supply chain technology firm rooted in the flat, pragmatic soil of Northmore, a city in the Midwest that values function over form. Our headquarters is a monument to brushed steel and recycled glass, a place where efficiency is the prevailing religion. My reputation within its walls is built on two pillars: discipline and discretion. I manage timelines, budgets, and people with the same cool, detached precision. My emails are concise, my meetings end on time, and my personal life is a locked file. Until recently, the key to that file was Evan Locke. As the lead for new product development, Evan was my counterpart, my intellectual sparring partner, and my fiancé. Together, we were co-leading Project Nightingale, a $40 million logistics overhaul for a global shipping conglomerate. Our work was a complex dance of Gantt charts and stakeholder management, a high-stakes performance we executed flawlessly. He was the visionary, I was the architect. We were a formidable team, professionally and personally. Our engagement was seen as a logical, strategic merger, the kind of power couple narrative that our corporate culture quietly celebrated. The variable I failed to properly account for was my sister, Sable Vale. She blew into Calix not through a formal hiring process, but through an agency referral she had cajoled from a contact. As a PR contractor, she was assigned to the Nightingale team to handle communications. She brought with her a whirlwind of social charm and a resume that was more creative writing than career history. She was all vibrant colored blazers and effusive compliments, a stark contrast to my muted palette of grays and navies. She was the one who remembered birthdays and organized after-work drinks, smoothing over the sharp edges of corporate life with a well-practiced smile. I saw her as a necessary, if occasionally irritating, component of the project ecosystem, a distraction. I was catastrophically wrong. The text of the anonymous Slack message arrived during the Q3 town hall. Just as the CEO was wrapping up his remarks on market penetration, my phone, face down on the polished concrete floor beside my chair, vibrated once. The notification was from a username I didn't recognize, a random string of letters and numbers. The message was 5 words long. Check the green room after Q&A. My focus didn't waver from the stage. I mentally cataloged the sender's ID for later investigation, my mind already running a diagnostic. A disgruntled employee? A misdirected message? I dismissed it as low-priority noise and continued taking notes. When the applause faded and people began to move, a cold curiosity finally nudged me from my seat. I bypassed the networking scrum. My path to the backstage area direct and unobstructed. People made way for me. The green room was a small, windowless space behind the main stage, smelling of stale coffee and lukewarm catering. The heavy velvet curtain that separated it from the stage was pulled almost shut, leaving a narrow gap. Through it, I saw them. Sable, her back pressed against a stack of equipment cases, her hands tangled in Evan's hair, and Evan, my fiancé. His hands on her waist, his mouth on hers. They weren't stealing a kiss. It was an act of ownership, a flag planted on conquered territory. The hum of the stage lights was the only sound. I didn't gasp. I didn't flinch. I simply pushed the curtain aside. The sudden flood of light made them break apart, blinking like startled animals. Sable recovered first, a slow, insolent smile spreading across her face. She smoothed down her dress, a picture of unbothered confidence. "Rowan," she said, her voice dripping with mock surprise. "We were just celebrating a successful town hall." Evan looked pale, his hand running nervously through the hair she had just been holding. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He looked at the floor, at the wall, at anything but me. "At work," Evan? I kept my voice level, the same tone I used to question a budget overrun. He opened his mouth, but Sable cut him off, stepping forward as if to shield him. "Oh, stop it. It's not like that." She laughed, a short, sharp sound that grated on my nerves. "Don't be so dramatic. Jealousy is such a bad look on you, especially at work." Her words were designed to frame me as the hysterical, emotional woman against her cool, desirable one. It was a classic Sable maneuver, a tactic she'd used since we were children. She defined the narrative, and everyone else was forced to react to it. But this was not our childhood bedroom. This was my domain. I looked past her, directly at Evan. His silence was the only confession I needed. "It's complicated." "Ro," he finally managed to say, the nickname sounding like an obscenity in the sterile air of the green room. I gave a single, sharp nod. My gaze was unflinching. "It's documented," I replied. The shift in the room was palpable. Evan's face tightened, the color draining from it completely. Sable's smile faltered, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. The word documented was a weapon in our world. It meant audit trails, email chains, server logs, evidence. It transformed a messy, emotional affair into a clear, prosecutable breach of corporate policy. I turned and walked away without another word. There were no tears, no raised voices. My heels clicked with a steady, metronomic rhythm on the concrete floor as I walked back through the now empty auditorium. At my workstation, I sat down, my hands steady on the keyboard. I opened the security software portal, navigated to the live feed controls for the event space, and located the camera covering the stage-left backstage area. I created a new rule: automatically save all footage from that camera, from the past hour and for the next 72, to a secure, encrypted folder in my personal OneDrive. I labeled the folder Audit Trail Q3. The process took less than 90 seconds. Calix Dynamics had a clear, unambiguous policy regarding inter-office relationships, a policy I had helped draft. Any romantic involvement between two employees working on the same high-value project had to be formally declared to HR via a relationship disclosure form. It was a matter of mitigating risk, avoiding conflicts of interest, and ensuring professional integrity. When Evan and I got engaged, we had filed our form the next day. It was a procedural formality, a box to be checked. I knew, with absolute certainty, that no such form existed for Evan Locke and Sable Vale. Their affair wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a compliance failure, a willful violation of the code of conduct. I pulled up the form from the internal HR portal. It was a simple, sterile PDF. I filled it out meticulously, using my own name and Evan's. In the section asking for the nature of the relationship, I wrote Fiancé. In the section for the date the relationship commenced, I entered the date of our engagement. I left the second employee's signature line blank. I saved the document as Disclosure Veil Lock Filed, PDF, and uploaded it to the secure HR Dropbox. It was a quiet declaration of fact, a time-stamped piece of evidence that established a formal, recognized relationship they had actively undermined. It was the first entry in my ledger. I could have gone to HR then and there. I could have triggered an internal investigation that would have seen Sable's contract terminated and Evan facing a disciplinary board. It would have been clean, efficient, and professionally justified, but it would have been their ending, written in the dry, impersonal language of a corporate memo. I refused to grant them that sterile conclusion. This was not a business transaction to be quietly resolved. This was a theft, and it demanded a more public form of accounting. So I did not take a leave of absence. I did not change my Slack status to working from home. The next morning, I was at my desk at 7:00 a.m., a full hour before either of them arrived. I approved pending invoices, responded to emails, and updated the project timeline. I would not allow them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I would not give them a single crack in my professional facade to exploit. My grief was my own. A cold, dense star collapsed inside my chest. It would be the fuel for what came next. Sable wanted a stage. She wanted to be the center of attention, the star of her own romantic drama. I would let her have it. I would wait. I would gather the data, and I would give her the biggest, brightest, most unforgettable stage of her life, her wedding day. The weeks following the town hall were a masterclass in corporate theater. On the surface, Project Nightingale proceeded with flawless efficiency. I ran my morning stand-ups with the same crisp cadence. My project plans remained immaculate, and my communication with stakeholders was a model of clarity. To the outside observer, Rowan Vale was unshaken. But beneath the calm surface, I was running a parallel project, one with a single deliverable and a non-negotiable deadline. This was not new terrain for me. My entire life had been a process of operating in the shadow of my sister, Sable. We grew up in Westfall, a town obsessed with appearances, with manicured lawns and pristine family reputations. In the Vale family, Sable was the product, and I was the process. She was the spotlight. I was the backup plan. When she was 7, she won the lead in the school play with a dazzling, if technically flawed, audition. I spent weeks after school with my father in the garage, measuring wood and driving screws, building the set she would stand on. When the local paper took a photo, she was front and center, her arms thrown wide. I was a blurry figure in the background, checking a support beam. That was our dynamic. Codified early. She performed. I ensured the stage wouldn't collapse. Our mother was the chief architect of this narrative. She saw Sable's recklessness as intuition and her emotional whims as a sign of a vibrant spirit. My methodical nature, my need for facts and evidence, was a deficiency. I remember once, after a high school boyfriend broke up with me for being too serious, I made the mistake of crying in front of her. She'd patted my shoulder with a sigh, not of sympathy, but of weary resignation. Sable feels her way through the world, darling, she had said, as if delivering a final, damning diagnosis. You are simply too practical to be truly loved. The words didn't just sting, they solidified into a kind of personal operating system. If practicality was my curse, I would weaponize it. I would become so practical, so logical, so undeniable in my facts that love would become irrelevant. Success would be my validation. This dynamic had its first major test in my final year of university. I was dating a fellow engineering student, a kind, steady man with whom I'd spent 2 years building a quiet, comfortable life. I came back to my apartment one afternoon to find him and Sable in my bed. The shock was visceral, a physical blow, but the family's reaction was even more instructive. There was an intervention, a family council where I was not the victim, but the problem to be managed. She made a mistake, my father said, looking at the floor. Sable is impulsive, my mother added. You know how she is. The unspoken message was clear. My pain was an inconvenience to the family's equilibrium. Forgive, forget, keep the peace. I was the older sister. It was my job to be the bigger person. So I broke up with the boyfriend, and I forgave Sable. A sterile, bloodless forgiveness that felt like swallowing glass. I did it to keep the peace. But what I really learned was that for my family, peace was not the absence of conflict, but the suppression of my truth. After that, our paths diverged completely. I earned a full scholarship for my master's in operations management, worked 2 jobs to pay for my living expenses, and graduated with honors and 0 debt. I built my career block by methodical block, earning promotions through sheer competence. I understood systems, and a corporation is just a complex system of rules, incentives, and consequences. Sable, meanwhile, floated through a communications degree, charming her professors and plagiarizing her way through papers she found boring. She bounced from one PR job to another, always leaving just before her lack of substance was fully exposed. She loved the microphone, but hated the follow-up email. She adored the grand gesture but despised the fine print of a contract. I, on the other hand, found comfort in the fine print. I lived for contracts, for process workflows, for the immutable truth of a timestamp. A timestamp cannot lie, it cannot be charmed, it simply is. When Evan proposed, I was genuinely happy. It felt like a logical and emotional culmination of a successful partnership. When I called my family to tell them, Sable's voice was the loudest. "Oh my God! Rowan, finally!" she'd squealed. A few hours later, a text arrived from her, a string of champagne bottle and firework emojis. "So happy for you, sis. You deserve this." I read the message and felt a flicker of something I mistook for warmth. 2 months later, she announced she had landed a contract with an agency that, by sheer coincidence, was a preferred vendor for Calix Dynamics. A month after that, she was serendipitously assigned to handle the internal communications for Project Nightingale. I saw it as an annoyance, a complication I would have to manage. I never saw it as an invasion. I was so focused on the project's critical path that I failed to see the threat vector sitting across the conference table from me every day. After I walked out of the green room, I fell back on my programming, silence and observation. I didn't tell my parents. I knew which side they would take. I could already hear my mother's voice. "Men are complicated. Rowan, you can't just apply logic to matters of the heart." A few days of tense silence passed before my mother finally called, her voice tight with forced neutrality. Evan and Sable had obviously gotten to them first, spinning their own narrative of an undeniable magnetic connection that I was too cold and possessive to understand. The family verdict was delivered in a single, devastating piece of advice. "Your father and I think you need to focus on yourself," she said. "Don't try to own a man. Rowan, own your future." I remember hanging up the phone, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. The advice was meant to silence me, to make me let this go, to once again absorb the damage for the sake of the family's carefully constructed facade. "Own your future," she'd said. I stood up and walked to my home office, the words echoing in my head. I sat at my desk and logged into the Calix Dynamics network. I looked at the folder on my drive labeled Audit Trail Q3. I nodded slowly to myself in the reflection of the dark monitor. Okay, I will. My mother thought the future was about moving on, about building a life separate from a man. She was wrong. In my world, the future was about access rights and audit logs. It was about the verifiable, documented truth, and I had full administrative privileges. Sable operates on the belief that I am bound by the old rules. She is confident in her power to manipulate emotions, to create a narrative where she is the romantic heroine and I am the jealous, vengeful shrew. She believes, at her core, that I would never detonate our family for the sake of my own pride. She is counting on my lifelong conditioning to keep the peace. She thinks I'm playing checkers. She doesn't realize I'm building a bomb out of her own bad decisions. Piece by documented piece. She believes family is a bond I will not break. She believes I am still the girl who swallows the glass. She is wrong. My work became my sanctuary, a fortress of logic and order in the chaos of my personal life, while Evan and Sable navigated their new, public relationship with a sickeningly performative joy. I immersed myself in the one thing they couldn't touch, the data. My grief was compressed into a diamond-hard point of focus. As the director of project operations, I had oversight of every line item in the Nightingale budget. It was in the minutiae of these spreadsheets, in the cold, hard numbers, that I began my real work. It started with a vendor I didn't recognize. In the expense forecast for Q4 event marketing, a new name appeared, Nimbus and Pine Creative. The line item was for $15,000, allocated for strategic communications and brand amplification. The description was corporate jargon, intentionally vague, designed to be overlooked. I didn't overlook it. I had personally approved every vendor on this project. This one was an anomaly. I ran a search through our central procurement database. Nimbus and Pine had been onboarded 3 weeks prior. The business address was a PEO box, and the contact was a generic info@email address. Red flags. My first step was to examine the invoice submission packet. It was a standard PDF, professionally designed but lacking substance. It was the digital fingerprint I was interested in. Every file uploaded to our system is tagged with metadata. including the IP address of the originating device. I cross-referenced the IP address from the Nimbus and Pine invoice with the access logs for the Calix guest Wi-Fi network. It took the system less than a second to return a match. The IP address belonged to a session initiated on a MacBook Air that had logged on using Sable's personal email as the guest credential. The connection had been active on the same day the invoice was submitted. She had created and uploaded the invoice from inside our own building, using the public network to cover her tracks. It was sloppy, it was arrogant, it was Sable. This was a clear violation, but it was circumstantial. I needed an undeniable link, a direct connection between company business and their personal relationship. I started a targeted search of the email server archives, using Evans and Sable's corporate accounts as keywords. I found nothing, which was in itself suspicious. They were too smart to use company email for a cover-up. So, I widened the net. I ran a system-wide search for any external emails sent to Evans' inbox containing attachments with keywords from Project Nightingale, specifically the confidential Q4 strategy deck. The result hit my screen at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night. An email, sent from a personal Gmail account, Sable, Vale, creative@gmail.com, to Evans' corporate address. The timestamp was 2:13 a.m. The subject line was Draft Deck. Attached was the full, confidential Project Nightingale Q4 strategic plan. The body of the message was a single sentence. Here's the confidential deck. Don't share. It was the digital equivalent of a smoking gun. Transmitting confidential company property to or from a personal email address was a fireable offense on its own. The time it was sent painted a picture of late-night collaboration that went far beyond the professional. The data points were beginning to form a clear, damning mosaic. My next query was physical. I pulled the badge access logs for our building for the past 90 days. I filtered for weekend and after-hours access, specifically between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. There it was, on a Sunday night, 5 weeks ago, 2 entries, seconds apart, Evan Locke. 11:58 p.m., Sable Vale. 11:58 p.m., they had entered the building together. I checked their movement logs. They went directly to the 4th floor. The executive wing, specifically, they badged into the secure contract printing room, a space equipped with industrial printers and binding machines, reserved for sensitive legal and client documents. Why would a product lead and a PR contractor need to be in the contract printing room on a Sunday at midnight? The final piece of the puzzle lay in our e-procurement system. Every expenditure requires a multi-level approval workflow. An expense like the one for Nimbus and Pine would typically require a request from the contractor, Sable, approval from the project lead, Evan, and final sign-off from operations, me. I had never seen this request. I dug into the audit trail for the payment. The request had been submitted by Sable, as expected, but it had been fast-tracked using an emergency approval designation, a feature reserved for critical, time-sensitive operational needs. The justification field simply said, urgent vendor payment for Q4 launch. The first-level approval signature was Evans, but next to it was a note, automatically generated by the system, approved by E. Locke on behalf of S. Vale. He had used his credentials to sign for her, bypassing the standard chain of command and circumventing my oversight entirely. It was a perfect self-contained loop of deceit. Sable creates a shell company. She invoices the project, using our own network. Evan approves the payment, using his authority to push it through without scrutiny. $15,000, funneled from our project budget directly into her pocket, and it was all facilitated by their undisclosed relationship, a gross conflict of interest. According to Calix policy, any employee with a personal or financial relationship with a vendor must file a vendor disclosure form with the legal department. A search confirmed what I already knew. No such form existed for Nimbus and Pine. I meticulously preserved each piece of evidence. I exported the incriminating email not as a screenshot, but as a full EML file, which preserves all the header information and metadata. I ran the file through a checksum calculator to generate a unique SHA-256 hash, a long alphanumeric string that acts as a digital fingerprint. Any change to the file, no matter how small, would change the hash, proving the evidence was untampered with. I compiled the IP logs, the badge access records, the e-procurement trail, and the email file into a single, encrypted container. Then, I sent a formal, one-line request to our internal counsel. Pursuant to standard audit procedures for Project Nightingale, please place an indefinite litigation hold on all email and access log data associated with Evan Locke and Sable Vale. Effective immediately. It was a quiet, procedural move that had the force of a tectonic plate shifting. It legally froze all the records, preventing them from being altered or deleted. The trap was now set and legally fortified. I didn't go to HR. An internal investigation would be swift, brutal, and private. Sable would be fired. Evan would likely be disciplined or quietly managed out. They would become a whispered cautionary tale in the hallways of Calyx. But it would all happen behind closed doors. Sable thrived in the spotlight. Her greatest punishment would not be a quiet termination. It would be public humiliation on a stage of her own making. I just needed to wait for her to build it. She didn't make me wait long. 2 weeks later, an email landed in my inbox, and the inboxes of half the company. The subject line was a string of ring and heart emojis. It was from Sable. She and Evan were engaged. The email was a masterpiece of personal branding, complete with a professionally shot photo of them laughing, a sparkling diamond on her finger. It was less an announcement and more a press release. It was followed by physical invitations, sent to the office, thick cardstock embossed with their initials. It was a brazen, calculated move, a victory lap designed to cement their narrative as the company's new power couple and me as a forgotten footnote. I held the invitation in my hands, the sharp edges of the paper digging into my skin. It felt heavy, not with sentiment, but with opportunity. This was the stage I had been waiting for. This was the venue. My finger traced the elegant script of the RSVP card. Kindly reply by October 1st. I picked up a pen and ticked the box next to "Will be attending." I sealed the envelope. The silent supporting character was now officially entering the third act. The engagement announcement detonated in the placid ecosystem of Calyx Dynamics like a carefully deployed bomb. My Slack notifications chimed in a frantic, cascading rhythm. The direct messages were almost exclusively from female colleagues, a digital chorus of concern, pity, and thinly veiled curiosity. "Rowan, are you okay? OMG, I just saw, thinking of you. Let me know if you need anything at all." They were well-intentioned, these messages, but they were also probes, attempts to gauge the extent of the damage, to get a first-hand account of the drama, for each one. I sent the exact same reply, a copy-and-pasted mantra of professional detachment. "Thanks for checking in. The project is on track." The repetition was not laziness. It was a wall. It offered no emotional purchase, no crack for gossip to seep into. It was a statement that my value, my state of being, was defined by my work, not by the man who had left my life. Sable, predictably, took the opposite approach. She waged a campaign of whispers and sympathetic head tilts in the communal kitchen and the quiet corners of the open-plan office. Her narrative was a work of art, painting me as a tragic figure, a woman scorned and unraveling. I would walk past a conference room and see her inside with a small audience, her hand on her heart, her voice a low murmur of feigned concern. I didn't need to hear the words to know their content. "She's just so jealous. I feel terrible for her. It's affecting her work. You know? She's become so cold and unstable." She was trying to poison the well, to preemptively discredit me by framing any future action I took as the lashing out of a jealous ex-fiancé. My response was a relentless, almost inhuman, display of competence. I did not alter my routine by a single minute. I arrived at 7:00 a.m., I left at 6:00 p.m. I chaired the daily Nightingale stand-up meetings with unwavering precision. My weekly progress reports were submitted 2 hours ahead of schedule. The minutes I distributed after each meeting were masterpieces of concision and clarity, not a single comma out of place, not a single action item unassigned. I was a machine built for execution. While Sable was weaving a story about my instability, I was producing a mountain of evidence to the contrary. Every perfect email, every met deadline was a silent rebuttal. Evan, caught between his new fiancé's PR campaign and my chilling professionalism, finally attempted to breach the silence. He cornered me by the elevators one evening, his expression a practiced mix of regret and resolve. "Rowan, can we talk? Just for a minute," he started, his voice low. "I think we can be adults about this." I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on the floor indicator above the elevator doors. The word adults was his attempt to frame this as a mature, mutual uncoupling. It was an insult to my intelligence. I reached into my leather portfolio and pulled out a single folded sheet of paper. I held it out to him. He hesitated, then took it. It was a printout of the Calix Dynamics Code of Conduct. Section 4.2. Relationships between employees and conflicts of interest. I had highlighted the paragraphs on disclosure requirements and fraternization within the same project hierarchy. "Start here," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside without a backward glance, leaving him standing in the hallway, the document in his hand like a writ of summons. Our conversation was over. From now on, we would communicate only through policy and procedure. My next move was to build a firewall. I sent a formal request to the chief financial officer and the head of HR in the email. I stated that due to a recently altered professional dynamic with the project's product lead, I was preemptively recusing myself from all financial approval authority related to Project Nightingale to avoid any potential perception of a conflict of interest. I recommended that all budgetary sign-offs be temporarily rerouted to the CFO's office for the remainder of the project. It was a strategic masterstroke. It painted me as the model of ethical conduct, a leader who put the company's integrity above all else. It also took my hands off the weapon I was building. When the financial misconduct I had uncovered finally came to light, no one could ever accuse me of having manipulated the books myself. I was simply the one who noticed the anomaly. Unbeknownst to Sable and Evan, my legal hold request had been quietly actioned. The internal counsel's office, seeing the names involved and the nature of the request, had flagged the entire matter for a routine vendor compliance audit. This was a standard corporate maneuver, but its effect was profound. A silent digital net had been cast over all of their communications and system activities. Every keystroke, every deleted file, was now being logged and preserved. They were operating in a cage they couldn't see, and I was the one who had the key. Sable, blissfully unaware, escalated her public performance. Her Instagram feed became a fire hose of wedding preparations. There were reels of her trying on dresses, videos of cake tastings, and boomerangs of clinking champagne glasses. In nearly every post, she would tag Calix Dynamics. Sometimes it was the location tag. Other times it was a hashtag, Calix Couple Work Love Story. She was co-opting the corporate brand, weaving it into her personal triumph to legitimize her story. She posted a particularly saccharine video of her and Evan touring a wedding venue, with the caption, "Building Our Future, inspired by the place we built our love, at Calix Dynamics." That was the final overstep. I did not comment. I did not engage. I forwarded the post to our head of corporate communications with a one-line message. "Please advise on brand usage policy for employee personal social media." 20 minutes later, the tag was gone. An hour after that, an all-company memo was distributed, reminding employees of the official guidelines for using the company's name and logo on social media. Sable received a direct, formal email from the legal department instructing her to cease and desist. The message was clear. You do not own this company's story. I do. That was when the tide of office opinion began to turn. The whispers didn't stop, but their tone changed. The pity was replaced by a grudging respect, and then by a low hum of apprehension. My silence was no longer seen as weakness or grief. It was seen as something else entirely. It was unnerving. "She hasn't cried once," I overheard one of the marketing associates say by the coffee machine. "She's too calm," her companion replied. stirring her latte. It's unnatural. Rowan is a planner. She must have something. That was the moment I knew my strategy was working. They no longer saw me as a victim. They saw me as a threat. They understood that in the quiet, sterile world of corporate power, the loudest voice rarely wins. Victory belongs to the one with the most documentation. That evening, as I was archiving the day's progress, I allowed myself a small, thin smile in the reflection of my dark monitor. The office was quiet. The servers hummed around me. My trap was meticulously constructed, legally sound, and completely invisible to its targets. All I had to do was wait for them to walk into it. The silence was no longer empty. It was the sound of the mechanism engaging, of the final tumblers clicking into place. The Aurelia Hotel was the crown jewel of Northmoor's hospitality scene, a symphony of white marble and cascading crystal chandeliers. It was the kind of place Sable would choose, not for its elegance, but for its price tag, a venue that was itself a statement. 3 months before the wedding, I scheduled a meeting not with the wedding planner, but with the hotel's venue manager, a man named Mr. Davies whose professional demeanor was as starched as his collar. I didn't introduce myself as the sister of the bride. I introduced myself as Rowan Vale, Director of Project Operations for Calix Dynamics. Mr. Davies, I began, my tone collaborative and professional. Calix Dynamics is thrilled that 2 of our key project leaders, Evan Locke and Sable Vale, have chosen the Aurelia for their wedding. Their success is our success, and we see this as a wonderful community event. He nodded, his interest piqued by the mention of a corporate entity. We've been reviewing our corporate sponsorship guidelines, I continued, seamlessly blending truth with fiction. And we'd like to officially sponsor a portion of the reception's audiovisual presentation, a small gesture to thank them for their contributions to a major company initiative. This was my entry point. I had reviewed the Aurelia's standard event contract, a copy of which was publicly available online for corporate clients. I knew it contained a standard clause, Article 7, Section B, which stated that all third-party media must be approved by the client and the venue, but also allowed for sponsor recognition slots, pre-negotiated and governed by a separate addendum. It was a loophole designed for corporate galas, not weddings. A sponsorship? He asked, intrigued. Precisely. We would cover the cost of the main screen projection package. In return, we would ask for a standard 90-second sponsor slot just before the main reception begins. A brief video to congratulate the couple and thank our team. It's great PR for them, and it aligns with our corporate values of celebrating our employees. The logic was unassailable. I was offering to pay for a premium service in exchange for something that sounded like a harmless corporate thank you card. To Sable and Evan, it would look like the company was officially blessing their union, a powerful endorsement that would legitimize their narrative. Mr. Davies readily agreed. He drew up a standard sponsorship addendum. It granted Calix Dynamics a 90-second slot for a media presentation. Content to be provided no later than 48 hours before the event. It was a simple, one-page document. I forwarded it to Sable's personal email address with a brief, encouraging note. Sable had a great chat with the Aurelia. If you sign this, Calix will cover the entire AV package for the reception as a wedding gift. Just a quick thank you video from the company. Great exposure for you and Evan. Let me know, Rowan. Her reply came in under 5 minutes. OMG, that's amazing. Yes. Attached was the signed addendum. She had signed her own death warrant with a flourish. Blinded by the promise of free PR and the validation she craved, she never asked to see the video. Her ego wouldn't allow her to imagine it would be anything other than a tribute to her. With the legal framework secured, I began to assemble the asset. I didn't think of it as a video. I thought of it as a compliance report delivered in MP4 format. I opened a new project in a video editing suite. The file was named Thank You Final, MP4. The first 70 seconds were meticulously designed to be reassuringly boring. I used stock footage from our corporate library, time lapses of our automated warehouses, smiling employees in hard hats, glowing charts showing upward trends in efficiency. I overlaid it with a generic, uplifting corporate music track and text celebrating the success of Project Nightingale. It was the kind of video that plays on a loop in 1,000 corporate lobbies, designed to be seen but not watched. It would lull the audience into a state of comfortable inattention. Then, at the 71-second mark, the music would stop. The screen would cut to black for a single, jarring beat. The first image to appear would be a high-resolution scan of the Nimbus and Pine invoice. The text would be sharp and clear. I used a simple red box overlay to highlight the amount, $15,000, and the electronic signature, E. Lock for S. Vale. After 5 seconds, it would cut to the next piece of evidence, a screen capture of the 2:13 a.m. email. I carefully redacted the sensitive project data within the attached deck, leaving only the header visible. To Evan, Locke at CalixDynamics.com, from Sable, Vale, creative@gmail.com, subject, draft deck. The timestamp was the hero of the image, circled in the same clinical red. Finally, the video, the clip from the stage-left security camera. The quality was grainy, the lighting poor, but the subjects were unmistakable. I applied a pixelation filter to the faces of the two stagehands in the background, preserving their anonymity while sharpening the focus on Evan and Sable. The kiss wasn't passionate. It was transactional, conspiratorial. It was a breach. There was no voiceover, no dramatic music. The only sound would be the ambient hum of the green room. Across the bottom of the screen, a single, sterile subtitle in the Calix corporate font would appear: Conflict of interest, undisclosed relationship per company policy. The final slide would be a black screen with white text. All materials presented are statements of fact, sourced from internal company records, and are public within the Calix Dynamics audit scope. No further comment will be provided. The entire evidentiary sequence would last exactly 20 seconds. The total runtime, 91 seconds, just over the agreed-upon slot, a tiny final act of defiance. I sent the completed MP4 file to our chief internal counsel, a humorless man named Marcus Thorne, with a single line: Marcus, please review the attached media file for factual accuracy and compliance with corporate communication standards. His response was prompt and devoid of curiosity. Rowan, the content of the video consists of documented facts, an invoice from our procurement system, metadata from our email server, and a security log from our archives. It contains no speculative language, accusations, or commentary. As a presentation of fact for a pending audit, it is compliant. He had, in his own way, just handed me a loaded gun and confirmed it was legal to fire. 48 hours before the wedding, I uploaded Thank You Final MP4 to the Aurelia's secure media portal, as stipulated in the addendum, but I never trust a single point of failure. I copied the file onto a matte black USB drive. I placed it in a small, silver foil envelope and sealed it with a holographic sticker bearing the Calix Dynamics logo. On the front, I printed a label: Sponsor Media Backup, the Aurelia Hotel for Vale Lock Wedding. Delivered to AV Booth DJ, it looked official, sterile, and deeply unimportant. On the day of the wedding, I would hand this to the event coordinator with a polite smile, a contingency plan hidden in plain sight. Every piece was now in place. The contract was signed. The evidence was compiled. The delivery mechanism was established, and the entire operation was sanctioned under the cold, impartial banner of corporate compliance. It was no longer about a stolen fiancé. It was about an audit, and audits are never personal. They are simply a reckoning. The ballroom of the Aurelia Hotel was a carefully constructed fantasy of white. Thousands of white hydrangeas and roses overflowed from crystal vases, their scent heavy and sweet in the air-conditioned chill. The tables were set with a precision I could appreciate: gleaming silverware, perfectly folded linen, and rows of crystal glasses that caught the light from the chandeliers and fractured it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. A floor-to-ceiling glass wall offered a panoramic view of the Westmore Fountain, its waters arcing gracefully in the late afternoon sun. The entire scene was one of opulent, unblemished perfection. It was a beautiful lie, and I was there to correct the record. I wore a simple, sleeveless sheath dress in a shade of dark charcoal. It was the color of storm clouds, of asphalt after rain. My hair was pulled back into a severe, low ponytail, not a single strand out of place. My makeup was minimal, my expression serene. I was not a guest, I was an auditor. I found my assigned seat at a table in the back, a strategic position with a clear view of the ceremonial arch and the exit. I was an observer, a non-participant, a ghost in my own stolen life. When the music swelled, the guests stood. Sable appeared at the end of the aisle on our father's arm, a vision in white. Her dress was an argument in itself, a desperate plea for innocence. It had too many layers of lace, too much intricate beading, a train that was ostentatiously long. It was the dress of a princess from a fairy tale, a costume designed to mask the character of the woman wearing it. She beamed, her smile wide and practiced, a performance of pure, unadulterated joy for the hundreds of phones capturing her entrance. Evan stood at the altar, looking handsome and trapped in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. As Sable made her way down the aisle, his eyes scanned the crowd. They were searching, and they found me. Our gazes locked for a single, protracted moment. It was not a look of longing or regret. It was a look of dawning horror. I didn't smile. I didn't scowl. I simply held his gaze and, with a subtle, deliberate movement, shifted my black clutch in my hand, the simple, dark rectangle of the backup USB drive, its edges catching the light, was visible for a second against the charcoal of my dress. I wasn't hiding it. I wanted him to see it. I wanted him to know this was not an accident. I saw the flicker of understanding in his eyes, the color draining from his face. He knew the ceremony was a formality. The real main event was yet to come. He broke eye contact, turning his attention back to his approaching bride. The ceremony was a blur of platitudes. The officiant, a man with a warm, generic smile, spoke of trust, partnership, and the sanctity of truth. Honesty, he said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast room, is the bedrock upon which a lasting marriage is built. The irony was so thick I could taste it. As he spoke, I heard a faint, high-pitched hum from the adjacent ballroom where the reception was set up. It was the sound of a high-lumen projector warming up, the cooling fans spinning to life. It was the sound of my presentation coming online. The ceremony continued, but its timeline had been superseded by my own. They exchanged vows they didn't mean and rings that symbolized a lie. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the room erupted in applause. Sable leaned in and kissed Evan with a possessive, theatrical passion. It was a kiss for the cameras, a final seal on her victory. As they turned to walk back down the aisle, the wedding planner, a woman with a headset and a clipboard, stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice bright and efficient, "if you would please make your way into the Aurelia Ballroom for the reception, the bar is open, and we will begin with a short sponsor thank you from our friends at Calyx Dynamics before dinner is served." The words, so innocuous to everyone else, landed like a starter pistol. Sable, holding tightly to Evan's arm, looked positively radiant. This was her moment of ultimate triumph. She had the man, the ring, the perfect wedding, and now the official corporate blessing. She practically floated into the reception hall, a conquering hero. Evan followed, his smile a brittle, unconvincing mask. I remained at the back of the room, letting the crowd flow past me. My table was positioned near a discreet side door that led directly to the reception ballroom's AV control booth. I had done my reconnaissance. I watched as the guests found their tables, their laughter and chatter filling the cavernous space. I stood by the wall, a silent, unmoving figure, my eyes fixed on the massive projection screen that dominated the front of the room. The DJ started playing some upbeat, forgettable pop song. The atmosphere was light, celebratory. Then, as scheduled, the house lights began to dim. The chatter softened as guests turned their attention to the screen. A hush fell over the room, A collective pause of anticipation. The screen, which had been glowing with a soft blue light, flickered to black. The darkness held for a beat. A moment of pure, suspended silence. Then, the screen lit up. The familiar sharp-angled logo of Calix Dynamics appeared, stark white against a corporate blue background. A few people clapped politely. I saw Sable squeeze Evan's hand, her smile widening. This was it, her coronation. The first 70 seconds of the video played exactly as I had designed. The uplifting music, the slick corporate B-roll, the shots of our global operations. It was perfectly, reassuringly dull. Guests started to turn back to their conversations, picking at bread baskets, sipping their champagne. The video was becoming background noise, just as I intended. Then, the music stopped. The screen cut to black. The abrupt silence was more jarring than a loud noise would have been. Every head in the room snapped back to the screen. In that silent darkness, I saw Sable's smile falter for the first time, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. The truth appeared, not with a bang, but with the cold, undeniable clarity of a legal document. The invoice, the email, the grainy, damning footage of the kiss in the green room. There was no sound, only the images, presented one after another like exhibits in a trial. The only text was the sterile, emotionless subtitles, a statement of fact, an audit in progress. The air was sucked out of the room. The silence was no longer expectant. It was heavy, suffocating. It was the sound of a beautiful lie being systematically, ruthlessly dismantled by the cold, hard light of documented reality. The first 15 seconds unfolded in a symphony of corporate self-congratulation. The upbeat, royalty-free music swelled as images of Calix Dynamics' gleaming fulfillment centers and diverse, smiling employees filled the screen. In the soft glow, I could see guests turning to each other, smiling politely. Champagne glasses were raised in gentle, appreciative toasts. Sable, at the head table, was preening, accepting the silent accolades as her due. She placed a proprietary hand on Evan's arm, leaning in to whisper something in his ear. It was the perfect picture of a happy couple being celebrated by a supportive employer. The lullaby was working perfectly. Then, at the 16-second mark, the music was not faded out. It was severed. The abrupt, total silence was a physical shock, a vacuum that pulled all the air and idle chatter from the room. The screen went black. A collective, confused murmur rippled through the 200 guests. The blackness was replaced by the stark, white image of a document. It was the Nimbus and Pine invoice. The image was high resolution, every word brutally clear. A simple, animated red box appeared, framing the digital signature field. Approved. E. Lock for S. Vale. I heard a fork clatter against a plate somewhere in the room. I saw the CFO of Calix, a man named Henderson who sat at a corporate table near the front, lean forward, his brow furrowed in concentration. He recognized the procurement form. The screen cut to black again, then immediately displayed the next exhibit, the header of the 2:13 a.m. email. The text was large, impossible to misread. The personal Gmail address, the corporate recipient, the damning timestamp. The red box now highlighted the attached file name. Nightingale Q4, Strategy, Confidential. Henderson's back went ramrod straight. Beside him, the head of our legal department slowly, deliberately, put down her wine glass. The murmur in the room died completely. There was only a tense, waiting silence. Then came the video. The grainy, poorly lit security footage filled the screen. There was no sound, save for a low ambient hum I had left in the audio track. The image was unsteady, but the subjects were undeniable. Sable, her back against the equipment cases. Evan, his hands on her waist. The kiss. It was not romantic. In the harsh industrial light of the backstage area, it looked sordid and cheap. A subtitle, in the clean, sans serif Calix font, faded in at the bottom of the screen. Conflict of interest, undisclosed relationship per company policy. A sound, a single, collective gasp, swept through the ballroom. It was a wave of pure, unadulterated shock. I saw one of the bridesmaids, a childhood friend of Sable's, bring a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. My mother's face, visible from my vantage point, had crumpled into a mask of disbelief. She was looking back and forth between the screen and me, the pieces clicking into place in her mind with agonizing slowness. That was when Sable finally broke. The illusion of the perfect bride shattered into a million pieces. "Turn it off!" she shrieked, her voice high and piercing, raw with panic. "Somebody, turn it off right now!" Her scream echoed in the silent room, but nothing happened. The video continued to play. I had made sure of it. The AV technician in the booth had been given a single instruction on the sponsorship addendum. The provided media was to be played in its entirety, with audio levels locked at the preset. Her authority had been signed away on the same document that promised her the spotlight. Evan didn't speak. He simply recoiled. He took a single, sharp step back from Sable, away from her hand that was still clutching his arm. The movement was not large, but in the focused silence of the room, it was a tectonic shift. It was a public act of separation. His face was a waxy, bloodless white, the color of bone. He was staring at the screen, not with the anger of a wronged man, but with the hollow-eyed terror of a man whose crimes had just been read aloud to the world. The security footage faded out, the screen returned to black, and the final text appeared, the words hanging in the air like a judicial sentence. All materials presented are statements of fact, sourced from internal company records and are public within the Calix Dynamics audit scope. No further comment will be provided. The text held for 5 seconds, then the screen went dark. A moment later, the house lights slammed on, flooding the room with a bright, unforgiving glare. The sudden illumination felt like an assault. No one moved, no one spoke. The silence was no longer empty. It was a solid object, a weight pressing down on every person in the room. It was thick with disgrace, with betrayal, with the ruin of a $100,000 wedding. 200 guests sat frozen, their faces a gallery of shock, pity, and morbid fascination. In the center of that terrible silence, at the head table that was supposed to be a place of honor, Evan finally turned his head. He looked at his new wife, his bride of less than an hour. His expression was utterly blank, his voice low and dead, yet it carried across the silent room with perfect, chilling clarity. "How long?" he asked. Sable just stared at him, her mouth slightly open, her chest heaving. The carefully constructed facade of her entire life had been demolished in 90 seconds. There were no more words, no more charming deflections, no more lies left to tell. She didn't answer. In the suffocating silence of the ballroom, every tiny movement became an event. Evan, who had stood frozen, now moved with a strange, deliberate calm. He did not look at the 200 pairs of eyes fixed on him. He did not look at me. He looked only at his own hands. Slowly, he reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket. The gesture was oddly formal, as if he were about to produce a business card. Instead, he withdrew a simple, polished, gold band, the wedding ring, the one he was meant to place on her finger. It had never made it that far. He took 3 steps forward, his expensive shoes making no sound on the thick carpet. He stopped in front of the wedding cake, a towering, 7-tiered confection of white frosting and delicate sugar flowers, a monument to a future that no longer existed. He held the ring between his thumb and forefinger for a moment, the gold catching the harsh glare of the chandeliers. Then, with no ceremony at all, he placed it on the edge of the bottom tier. It rested there for a second before sinking slightly into the soft buttercream, a small, golden wound in the pristine white facade. He turned, not to face Sable, but to address the room, to address the silent corporate witnesses from Calix Dynamics. His voice was not emotional. It was clear, precise, and utterly devoid of warmth. It was the voice of a man reading a statement to a board of directors. "I will not start a marriage," he said. enunciating each word with chilling precision. With a reportable incident, the phrase hung in the air, a piece of corporate jargon so cold and clinical it was more damning than any curse. He had reduced their entire relationship, their engagement, this whole lavish spectacle, to a compliance issue, a problem to be logged and mitigated. Sable seemed to break out of her paralysis at his words. A raw, guttural sound escaped her lips, and she lunged for him, her manicured fingers clawing at the sleeve of his jacket. "Evan, no, don't. We can fix this." It was a desperate, primal plea. He pulled his arm back, not with anger, but with a weary, final disengagement. He looked at her then, for the first time since the lights came up, his eyes as empty as a winter sky. "Don't make a scene, Sable," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more brutal than her shriek. "You already did." And then he turned his back on her. He turned his back on the head table, on the uneaten meal, on the life he had been about to begin. He started to walk. The crowd, which had been a single, frozen entity, became a collection of individuals who instinctively, silently, moved aside. A path cleared for him down the center of the ballroom. No one spoke to him. No one touched him. Husbands and wives leaned away from the aisle as if he were radioactive. He walked with a steady, unhurried pace, his eyes fixed on the grand double doors at the far end of the room. He was a ghost leaving his own life. When he reached the doors, a hotel staffer in a black uniform hurried to pull one open for him. For a moment, he was framed in the doorway against the deepening twilight. A gust of cool evening air swept into the stuffy, overheated ballroom, carrying with it the faint, rhythmic sound of the Westmore fountains splashing in the courtyard outside. The sound was lonely and clean. As he stepped across the threshold, a series of brilliant, frantic flashes erupted from the lobby beyond. The wedding photographers, finally realizing the story was not at the altar but at the exit. But the hotel's private security was already moving. Two large men in dark suits stepping forward to block the cameras, their hands held up in a universal gesture to stop. One of them spoke into a radio on his shoulder. "Secure the west exit. Private exit." The door swung shut, leaving us with only the lingering chill and the after-images of the flashing bulbs on our retinas. Evan was gone. Throughout it all, I had not moved. I remained standing by the wall, a statue carved from ice. My hands, clasped loosely in front of me, had not trembled. My breathing was slow and even. There was no smile on my face, no flicker of triumph in my eyes. There was nothing. I was a camera, recording the data. I was the system executing a command. The result was not a victory. It was a completed process. Sable's head whipped around, her eyes, wild and frantic, finally finding me in the crowd. The disbelief in her face curdled into pure, venomous rage. Her carefully constructed world had been burned to the ground, and she was looking at the arsonist. "You!" she screamed, her voice cracking, the sound raw and ugly. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "You jealous witch! You couldn't stand to see me happy!" The officiant's lapel microphone was still live. The room's sound system picked up her accusation and amplified it, followed by the raw, ragged sound of her first sob. It was a terrible, gulping noise, the sound of a complete and total unraveling, broadcast in high fidelity for everyone to hear. At the family table, my mother made a small, wounded sound. She didn't look at Sable. She didn't look at the empty space where Evan had been. Her head slowly sank, her shoulders slumped, and she sagged into her chair as if her bones had dissolved. She covered her face with her hands, a gesture of ultimate defeat. She wouldn't look at me. She couldn't. To look at me would be to acknowledge the truth, that the monster they had spent their lives appeasing was not me, but the daughter they had always enabled. The wedding planner, her face a mask of professional horror, made a frantic, slashing motion with her hand toward the DJ booth. A moment later, the upbeat pop music that had been poised to restart the celebration was cut off mid-beat. The abrupt silence that followed was different. It was final. The party was over. The cake would not be cut. The toasts would not be made. The dance floor would remain empty. There was only the bright, merciless light, the stunned silence, and the lingering echo of a single, reportable incident. As the chaos began to crest, guests murmuring and rising from their seats, a bridesmaid rushing to Sable's side, my father looking lost and old, I moved. My actions were not driven by emotion, but by a pre-planned sequence. The final steps of my project plan. The room was a tableau of social implosion, but I was already in the aftermath, executing my exit strategy. The venue manager, Mr. Davies, materialized at my elbow, his face pale and his professional calm shattered. "Ms. Vale," he whispered, his voice tight with panic. "What is happening? Do I need to call security? The police?" He was looking at Sable, who was now being half supported, half restrained by her friends, her sobs devolving into incoherent shrieks. "No, Mr. Davies," I said, my voice calm and low. I turned to face him, forcing him to meet my gaze and break his focus on the drama. "The situation is resolved. Everything is concluded." My composure seemed to steady him. He looked at me, searching for an explanation I had no intention of giving. I reached into my clutch and retrieved a slim white envelope, pre-sealed and unmarked. I handed it to him. "This is for your records," I said. "It's a copy of the executed sponsorship addendum, confirming that the 90-second media presentation was delivered by Calix Dynamics as per our agreement." He took the envelope, his fingers fumbling slightly. He understood immediately. This was not a document of explanation. It was a document of absolution. It was his protection. Whatever civil or personal fallout was about to occur, his hotel had simply fulfilled its contractual obligation to a corporate sponsor. I had given him a legal shield, and in doing so, had formally closed my business with him. He nodded, a flicker of grudging respect in his eyes. "Thank you, Ms. Vale." My phone vibrated in my hand. I glanced at the screen. It was a text message from Marcus Thorne, our internal counsel. The text was as concise as the man himself. "Audit package received and logged. Thank you for maintaining the chain of custody. Discretion is appreciated." I typed back a single letter. "Why?" Confirmed. The chain of custody, from the green room to the encrypted file to the public display, was now officially part of a corporate legal proceeding. What had happened here was no longer a family drama. It was the presentation of evidence. My actions were now protected under the umbrella of a legitimate internal audit. With my back to the room, I opened my email app. I composed a new message to the head of our PR department and carbon-copied Marcus Thorne. Subject: Brand integrity. Vales. Lock event. Body: effective immediately. Please issue a formal request to contractor Sable Vale to remove any and all mentions, tags, or logos associated with Calix Dynamics from all personal social media posts related to her wedding event. This is to maintain brand separation from an internal personnel matter, now subject to a compliance review. Thank you. I hit send. It was the final, sterile severing. Sable had tried to wrap herself in our corporate brand for legitimacy. I was now formally stripping it away, leaving her exposed. There would be no celebratory tweets from me, no cryptic, philosophical Facebook statuses, no Instagram stories hinting at a new chapter. My only public statements were now part of the legal record. My communication was complete. I slipped my phone back into my clutch and turned. A figure was standing in my path. One of Evan's groomsmen, a man named Mark I vaguely knew from college. He looked shaken, his face a mixture of confusion and morbid curiosity. He was the first person to dare to speak to me directly. "Rowan," he said, his voice hesitant. He gestured vaguely at the wreckage of the head table. Are you happy?" The question was so fundamentally misaligned with the reality of the situation that it was almost absurd. Happiness was a luxury, an emotion for a different kind of life. It had never been the objective. The objective was a correction, a balancing of the ledger. "I have the truth," I replied. My voice even. I didn't offer any further explanation. I let the statement stand on its own. A cold, hard fact in a room suddenly devoid of comforting lies. He stared at me for a moment, then gave a slow, uncertain nod, and stepped aside. I began to walk toward the exit, my path taking me past the gift table near the entrance. It was laden with beautifully wrapped boxes and crisp envelopes, tokens of affection and support for a marriage that had lasted less than an hour. Beside a silver-plated toaster oven, I paused. I reached into my portfolio and took out a final, empty envelope, the same kind I had given to the venue manager. I placed it gently on the pile of gifts. It was a wordless metaphor. My wedding gift to them, an empty promise, a void, a transaction with nothing inside. The air in the ballroom was thick with the scent of dying flowers and expensive champagne that had been spilled on the carpet. But beneath that, there was another smell, faint and acrid. It was the smell of hot electronics, the slightly burnt plastic odor of a projector that had been running at maximum brightness and was now cooling in the sudden darkness. It was the smell of the weapon after it had been fired. I glanced back at the screen that had been the stage for my entire operation. The Calix Dynamics logo had finally faded to black. The screen was now a blank, silent void, and the room, without the focal point of the ceremony or the presentation, suddenly felt vast and empty. It was just a rented hall, full of broken decorations and stunned people. I didn't go toward the main lobby where the guests were beginning to trickle out, their voices low and hushed. I walked to the glass wall and pushed open one of the heavy doors that led to the balcony overlooking the fountain. The cool night air was a relief, a clean rinse after the stale, supercharged atmosphere inside. The rhythmic sound of the fountain was steady and calming, a sound that had existed before this night and would exist long after. I stood at the marble balustrade and looked out over the manicured gardens of the Aurelia, at the distant, glittering lights of Northmoor. I took one long, deep breath. The air filled my lungs, cold and clean. It was not a gasp of sorrow. It was not a prelude to tears. It was a system purge, an exhalation. I had been holding that breath for months, and now it was gone. The project was complete. The final report had been delivered. My work here was done. Standing on the balcony, suspended between the wreckage inside and the indifferent city outside, my phone vibrated against the cold marble of the balustrade. A single, silent buzz. I pulled it from my clutch. The screen a rectangle of harsh light in the gathering dark. A text from Evan. 2 words. I'm sorry. It was the message of a coward. A pathetic, 2-word attempt to offload a fraction of his guilt. Sent into the digital void in the hope of some kind of unearned absolution. It was an input that required no output. I didn't type a reply. I didn't block his number. I simply read the words, processed them as the final, useless piece of data from a failed system, and switched the screen off. His apology was irrelevant. It was like a log entry noting a critical error after the server had already been shut down. A moment later, the phone came to life again, this time with a frantic, insistent ringing. The screen glowed with a name I had spent a lifetime trying to manage, to contain, to understand. Sable. I could almost hear the shriek on the other end of the line, the incoherent rage and accusations that would pour out. It was a call searching for a fight, for an emotional engagement, for a final messy scene that would put her back at the center of the narrative. I pressed the volume button on the side of the phone twice. The ringing stopped. The screen still showed her name. The call still active, but now silent. I watched it for a moment, this desperate, silent plea for my attention. Then I let it time out and fall into the digital abyss of my voicemail. She could leave her message. It would join the others in the archive. I turned my attention back to the necessary, final piece of business. I opened my email and saw a new message had arrived from the head of PR, flagged as urgent. Subject, urgent. Press inquiry protocol? Body. Rowan, in light of tonight's events, what is the official company position? How do we respond if we get calls? My fingers moved quickly across the screen. Composing the last email I would ever need to send on this subject, I copied Marcus Thorne from legal. Subject: urgent. Press inquiry protocol. Body: there is no company position because this is not a company event. There is an internal audit in progress concerning employee conduct and vendor compliance. No statements will be made by any party. This is an internal matter only. I hit send. It was the final firewall. The last door sealed shut. The narrative was now contained within the walls of Calyx Dynamics, where it would be handled not by publicists, but by lawyers and HR professionals. It would be a story told in memos and disciplinary hearings, not in gossip columns. My work was done. I leaned down and unstrapped the thin, punishing straps of my high-heeled shoes. The relief was instantaneous. I held them in one hand, their weight negligible, and began to walk. My bare feet, a stark contrast to the opulence of the hotel. I bypassed the chaos of the lobby and took a side staircase that led to a stone terrace. The steps were cool and slightly damp from the mist of the nearby fountain. The texture of the stone gritty and real beneath my soles. Each step was a deliberate move away from the fantasy inside and back into the solid, factual world. From the terrace, the city of Northmore spread out before me, a vast and complex circuit board humming with 1,000,000 quiet processes. The distant river was a slow, dark data stream. The traffic lights blinked in their rhythmic, logical sequence: green, yellow, red, proceed, caution, stop. The low, constant hum of the city was not the sound of life, but the sound of a massive server farm, processing, logging, and moving on. Tonight, I had been a part of that system. I had identified a critical vulnerability, a corrupt process that threatened the integrity of the network. I had isolated it, documented it, and executed a termination protocol. The logs were saved. The task was complete. The server was stable. I glanced at my watch. The time was 9:47 p.m. The video had started at approximately 9:35 p.m. It had taken 12 minutes, a little over my initial 10-minute estimate, but well within an acceptable margin of error. The mission was accomplished. There was nothing left for me to do here. There were no tears to wipe away, no shattered family to try and glue back together. There was no one to embrace, no one to explain myself to. I would not stay to help clean up the mess. The mess was the point. It was the result of the data, the inevitable outcome of their actions, displayed for all to see. To offer comfort or explanation would be to soften the truth, to dilute the final report. The facts had been presented. They required no emotional appendix. I walked the length of the terrace to the main driveway, the gravel crunching softly under my bare feet. I didn't look back at the grand, brightly lit facade of the Aurelia Hotel. It was a compromised location, a crime scene. It no longer concerned me. The valet, a young man with a stunned expression, saw me approaching and averted his eyes, pretending to be busy with his podium. I didn't need my car. I lived only a dozen blocks away, and the walk would be a welcome transition, a final clearing of the cache. I walked past him and out onto the street. The automatic glass doors of the hotel's main entrance slid open as another couple hurried out, then slid shut behind them. For a brief second, as the doors closed, I caught my own reflection in the darkened glass. My face was calm, my expression unreadable. There was no malice, no joy, just a profound and unshakable stillness, the face of a woman who had finished her work. I turned my back on the hotel and began to walk home. The city hummed around me. The cool night air felt clean. A single, final thought formed in my mind, as clear and decisive as a court ruling. No further comment. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And to help this story reach even more people, please support it by hitting that hype button. It truly makes a difference.